Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Midway Mom Reads, where we dig into books that enhance and inform our homeschooling journey. I'm Shannon, a homeschooling mom since 2009 and a student of the Islamic sciences. I'm working toward my bachelor's degree in Islamic studies from Mishka University. I've been using the Charlotte Mason method since about 2016, so I'm hoping that this series helps more parents realize the value of the Charlotte Mason method in their homes. We're starting with the most classic book of the Charlotte Mason method, that is Home Education. And it's the first of her series with that same title of that we have titled Home Education. We'll work through the book together, inshallah. I will discuss highlights of the book without the assumption that you have read it yourself, but of course, you will gain a much greater understanding if you read the book as well. So today we're picking up with the section on sightseeing or how to use out of door time. So if you're following along, we are on page 45. And again, she calls this section sightseeing. So this is the main activity that she suggests for parents to do when they're spending all this time out of doors. So, like we talked about in the last episode, she suggests that you spend hours outside, like up to 6 hours outside a day, on any day that is suitable. So, and she even said between April and October. So there's gonna be, if you're in Florida, that's going to look maybe it's October to April, but for each of us, it's looking at where is the opportunity for me to spend these large portions of my day out of doors, because it's very easy for us to find excuses of why we can't instead of finding opportunities of when we can, even if it doesn't get to that 6 hours, at least one day a week that we're doing that, solid 6-hour stretch. So then, of course, the question is like, what in the world do I do during that time? And I believe we talked about last time that we're not supposed to use that time of like bringing books and games in like, okay, well, we're going to be in this boring place. So now I need to bring all these things to entertain you. The idea is that we're bringing you to a place that just is inherently a place of play, inherently interesting, inherently something that you're going to be curious about and you're going to notice things. So we don't need to bring all these additional things in order to kind of make up for its lack of, glitz and glamour and that type of thing. It's I will say I find it very valuable in our time. So again, Charlotte Mason wrote this about 100 years ago. So in that time, TVs weren't around. I don't know if radios were really in most people's homes at that time or not. Um, but these like various forms of entertainment in the home, they were nowhere near what we're dealing with today. So having this time where children are able to entertain themselves is something that I see sorely lacking in most children of our general society. I'm not going to break it down, to be more specific than that, but in general, um, kids go off and say, "I'm bored," so fast because they're so used to everybody entertaining them. Everything's a mode of entertainment. Okay, anyways, off my little soapbox. So, again, this primary lesson that is being held during this out of doors time is asking the children to tell you about what they see. So it could be, let's say that you go to a park. Let's say like a large park, right? You have like kind of your city park that's at the end of the road. And then that one, I don't know, maybe it's a few acres, but maybe it has like a soccer field and a playground. Try to find a park that one, ideally it doesn't have a playground, just because then again, that looks like that's your entertainment, and it's easy to get sidetracked. It's easy to say, "Oh, yeah, whatever, that's a bird, whatever, that's a creek." But when you go to these nature trails where you can, like, play in the creek, where you can play in the forest, there are nature centers, at least here in Minnesota, where you can have, like they call them, like, natural play areas where they have, like, sliced logs, that they can like build up and make like little stools. They can, build forts and that type of thing. So it's still a bit structured, but this is, let's say that you're going to a state park. Here in Minnesota, we have a number of state parks. They're pretty well maintained. I assume that most states have at least a few state parks or regional or national parks. Know what's in your area and what resources are available to you, and go to those. And you park yourself somewhere. Bring a blanket, bring some snacks and that type of thing, and tell the child, "Oh, over there, do you see that there's, let's say, a brook over there? Not a large river, but like a brook. Can you go over there and come back and tell me all about it? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell?" And so they come back and they tell you all about it. And when you're looking at the long game of the Charlotte Mason method, this is the beginning of their oral narrations. This is how they become uh, attuned to details, attuned to remembering those details and being able to tell that back, being able to tell about something that's interesting to them in a way that other people can understand. Those are all like really, really, really important skills. I hear so many families say, "How do I teach my kid to write? How do I teach my kid to write? How do I teach my kid to write?" First, we have to teach them how to tell us about something. So if I were to ask somebody here, "Tell me about the book that you're reading." And honestly, this is something that I struggle with myself. If somebody asks me, "Tell me about the book that you're reading," it's like, "Oh, um, like I know what's happening, but how do I put that in a first, middle, last order of what I want to tell them? How do I describe the story that I have read so far without either giving such a small bit of information that it doesn't make sense, or going on and on and on and on and on where I've lost them, right? They are no longer interested in what I have to say. So this really is the first building block in being able to write, because they are able to take the information that they have and put it in an order that is meaningful to somebody else. She goes on to talk about the educational uses of sightseeing. So beyond what I just said, she said, "This is all play to the children, but the mother is doing invaluable work. She is training their powers of observation and expression, increasing their vocabulary and their range of ideas by giving them the name and the uses of an object at the right moment. When they ask, 'What is it?' and 'What is it for?' And she is training her children in truthful habits by making them careful to see the fact and to state it exactly without omission or exaggeration." Right? So if the kid is like, "There was a million trees." Oh my gosh. Like, how could we be sitting here if there's a million trees? How many trees do you think there actually were? Right? Do you think maybe it was dozens? Was it, a few? So again, just kind of training in that habit of observation. And then I think for a lot of kids, if they're not used to this, we might get back descriptions like, "There was a tree and I saw a squirrel on it." The end. And we want more than that, because again, this is a lesson, but we want it to feel like a conversation. We want this to be, very low pressure. We want this to be fun, because really, I don't know, if who has been to, there's like art pieces at the art museum where like you look very closely in the finest details. You're like, "Oh my gosh, this is meaningful and that is meaningful." Like everything is there for a reason. And we want our children to be able to get that joy of seeing those little things. Like, you can find these videos like all the hidden things of Disney movies and all the hidden things from whatever your favorite movie is or whatever your favorite book is. Um, there's a funny one that, so the guy who reads the Harry Potter books, I believe on Audible, or, I'm sure there's more than one, but this one particular guy, who was doing this interview, and he said, so they have these instructions, like you need to read it word for word, or can you kind of paraphrase something, like, instead of he inquired, you could say he asked, whatever. And so, apparently, J.K. Rowling wanted every single word to be exact from how she wrote the book. And the guy the guy who was reading it for this audiobook, he said there's this phrase, "Harry pocketed it." And he said he really just struggled with it. So he reached out to the author, he reached out to J.K. Rowling, and he said, "Can I say he put it in his pocket? Harry put it in his pocket?" She said, "No. I want it to read exactly as it is. Harry pocketed it." And now, like, knowing that piece of information and then you read it again, it makes you chuckle when you see in every book after that. So I believe that was the first book, that phrase is in it. In every single book, there's that phrase, "Harry pocketed it." So when we see these details, there's a joy in it, and we have to believe that our children are capable of finding this joy as well. So, if they don't give a decent description, don't go walk over there and say, "Okay, well, I'm gonna give you the description that I have." Um, Tell them, "Well, I wanted to know if it was a maple tree or an oak tree. Can you describe the leaves for me? Can you describe the bark?" Or they're like, "There was a bird." "Well, what kind of bird?" "Well, I don't know. It was, a brown bird." "Was it a large bird? Was it a small bird? Did it have um, a short beak, a long beak, all of these different things. And maybe you have, and we'll actually talk about this in the next section, I believe, of, having like field guides and those type of things where you can look these things up. And having that level of detail helps you find the name. And then it's fun to see it like, oh, there's a blue jay, not just, oh, there's a big bird and it's blue. So once the children know the names of things, they become a little bit more excited to describe these things for you. So it takes some time. Um, and if they come to the point where they have given a good amount of detail, then you could say something like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I want to go see for myself." But don't do that before they have that level of detail. Continue to encourage them to give you more detail. So the next section is called discriminating observation. So this is the ability to recall details. And this is a gift. This is a gift to their future life that they will treasure. That they're, let's say, on their wedding day, and they want to remember, let's say you have a little boy and he wants to remember his wife's wedding dress. Not everybody keeps those. Maybe he wants to remember the weather of that day or the sunset of, on his honeymoon or whatever the case is. Being able to recall those things is such a gift later in life that it's worth the time that we put into it. So she says about this idea, she says, "The miserable thing about the childish recollections of most persons is that they are blurred, distorted, incomplete, no more pleasant to look upon than a fractured cup or a torn garment. And the reason is not that the old scenes are forgotten, but that they were never fully seen. At the time, there was no more than a hazy impression that such and such objects were present, and naturally, after a lapse of years, those features can rarely be recalled of which the child was not cognizant when he saw them before him." The first time I read this, I thought about my own childhood memories and how much I really took the time to take a picture with my mind of the things I was looking at. And I think, growing up in the 80s, like, sure, we had cameras, we had the disposable cameras, but there wasn't this expectation, one, that the camera would do any good at capturing this picture. Um, but there just wasn't this thought of like, oh, I really like that. I need to take a picture of that. And now I see, oh, we've been hiking at a few national parks, and one pattern that I've seen that, I mean, everybody's free to do what they wish, but within this context of being able to like take in a picture with your mind and you get to hold on to that. Like I can sit here and think about the mountains in Montana because I just sat there and took it in. There's no way that I would be able to do that if I got to the end of this trail or whatever this lookout point was, I took a picture, took a selfie, and then I walked away. There's no way. There's no way. There's no moment for awe in any of those moments because you didn't give yourself any kind of moment, if I can say it for the 100th time, you didn't give yourself a moment to pause and just take it in. Just another example, if I can, really hit it home, inshallah. Um, we were watching fireworks one year. My husband was taking a video of the fireworks. And when you're taking a video, like you tend to look at the camera, your 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch, whatever screen in front of you, when like the actual image is so much better. And the thing is, let's take the fireworks again. How many times are you gonna go back to that and look at it? So I don't want us to get in the habit of like, "Oh, you wanna take pictures of this. Here's a phone, here's your own camera." No, 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 no. We're gonna slow down and we are going to teach how to like take a picture with your mind. And if you continue with the Charlotte Mason method, there are elements in the curriculum where they're gonna be drawing things from memory. So this is a really important aspect of their training as a young child, or even if you're starting when they're 10, 12, 14 years old, this is something you can learn. The next section is called picture painting. So again, this is a picture with the mind. We are not yet to the point where they're drawing pictures. So she says that children naturally see the small details. I think all of us can see that where they're the first one to notice a toad on the trail or like a moth here. So asking them to then take in a landscape. So sitting at the top of a hill, or maybe it's at the foot of a hill, and you're looking up, taking in this wide landscape and asking them to take a picture in their mind and tell you about it. So it's similar to what we just mentioned, but what we first mentioned is the detailed aspect, right? What do you see at the base of that tree? What do you see at the crook of that brook? And this one is more like sit back and take in, like, maybe without even like moving your head. What do you see when you take in this whole picture? Um, and then they're supposed to come back and tell you about it. And she gives an example of kind of the ideal kid coming back and explaining what they saw. So this is the child says, "I see a pond. It is shallow on this side, but deep on the other. Trees come to the water's edge on that side, and you can see their green leaves and branches so plainly in the water that you would think there was a wood underneath. Almost touching the trees in the water is a bit of blue sky with a soft white cloud. When you look up, you see that same little cloud, but with a great deal of sky instead of a patch, because there are no trees up there. There are lovely yellow water lilies round the far edge of the pond, and 2 or 3 of the big round leaves are turned up like sails. Near where I'm standing, 3 cows have come to drink, and one has got far into the water, nearly up to her neck." So this is a really nice example of the ideal. And when you're working with your children on these exercises, take the time to actually do it yourself as well. You could say, "Okay, it's my turn. I'm going to look in this direction, maybe the opposite direction. And I'm going to take a couple minutes and I'm going to take it all in. And then I'm going to tell you what I see." And think of this example that she just gave in this book of things like the water lily leaves are turned up like sails. So, beautiful ways that you can describe things. Make it more like telling a story. Think about how would an author describe this? That the clouds are wispy or they're heavy with oncoming rain, so on and so forth. That way, they have somebody to emulate. They have something to copy. And I think sometimes when we're trying to do something with our child, we come down to their level in terms of ability or yeah, maybe ability or, like, acting like, "Oh, yeah, I don't know this either," and really honing in on that and on the equality of us, and there's definitely space for that. There's 100% there's space for, "Hey, yeah, I'm learning here with you. I didn't know what this was called, and then I looked it up in this book, and now I know." But in certain areas, most ideally, we should be somebody that they can aspire to be. So instead of us talking down with our language, we can keep at our language, and that way they are learning new vocabulary, they're learning prose, they're learning how to describe things, how to make good use of their words. And this might take a lot of practice for us too, but just to be mindful that we're not kind of dumbing down what we're saying for their sake, because that's not actually doing them any favors. She did say because this is a difficult exercise, only do it from time to time. She didn't say like once a week, once a month. She wasn't super exact. I think it really depends on the child and how much they enjoy this exercise. If you're doing this out of door time pretty often, maybe once a week would be great. If it's less often, you don't, excuse me, you don't want it to be, oh, every time we go outside, I have to do this hard thing. So maybe it's once a month. But having that stretching of their mind to do this activity is really beneficial for them. And I will say, just with my own kids, I've seen such a great result from asking these open ended questions, asking them to describe things to me, and not taking super simplistic answers, asking for more information. So, the next section, she talks about seeing fully in detail. So, we describe this picture painting, as she says, um, as a way to hold on to these pictures with our mind. Like I said, I can still think of what the mountains look like and how it felt when we were in Montana. And a this is something that we want to give to our kids as well, that even when they're stuck at home, when for us in Minnesota, when it's a very long winter and we're, stuck inside for a while, that we can still hold on to these paintings essentially. But we have to study these images first, whether it's on a macro scale or a micro scale. Both of them, we have to take that time. And I will say when the kids are older, this is very helpful for them learning spelling as well. Having that both macro and micro view where they're able to kind of take that picture with their mind. We really want to hone in on that skill of taking a picture with their mind. This will help them in innumerable ways throughout their life, inshallah. And she goes on to quote this one poem from Wordsworth about this idea of taking a picture with the mind. So Wordsworth said, um, though absent long, these forms of beauty have not been to me as a landscape to a blind man's eye. But oft in lonely rooms, and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind, with tranquil restoration. So he's describing this gift of being in the middle of towns and cities, and in his time, towns and cities were kind of dirty places. Um, I was reading this one book, and granted, the time period doesn't exactly line up, but there was a period of time where towns and cities basically there was no bathroom. So, extrapolate that and what that means with a lot of people in that space. Like, there's no outhouses, there's no like public bathrooms, there's no private bathroom. Like, people just go where they go. And not necessarily that Wordsworth is in that time period, but it took some time for cities and towns to get cleaned up. You have like the industrial age where there was just a lot of pollution. So he's saying, when he's mid the din of towns and cities, that he's able to pull this up, from his blood and from his heart and his pure mind, that he's able to pull up these images when he's in this other space where there's not a whole lot of beauty in that time, in that place. This gift does take practice, it does take patience. Even for myself, it's something that I'm working on all the time, to not just, give it a cursory glance and move on, that you're really soaking it in and recognizing I can't do that quickly. It does feel like, well, yeah, I saw everything. Yeah, I saw everything. But can you remember it 5 minutes from now? Can you describe it 5 minutes from now? She goes on to say, and yet this is no high poetic gift which the rest of us must be content to admire, but a common reward for taking pains in the act of seeing, which parents may do a great deal to confer upon their children. Then she ends this section with a reminder to not treat this as a trick that is to be repeated to family and friends. Like, oh, look at what little, Saliha can do. Saliha, tell them about the cottage that you saw and how you described that to me. This isn't a party trick to show off to friends and family. So having this ability should be a joy in and of itself. We should not debase it to, oh, I can show off to other people, or being able to brag about it or see other people's reactions to it. She even goes on to say, like, if you're going to tell the father, do it in private. Don't tell him in front of the child. And it took me a little bit of time to really wrap my mind around why she's saying this. And, it's not that it's like, well, Charlotte Mason said it, and so therefore we have to do it. But I wanted to give it some thought. And it does line up with this idea of internal locus of control versus external locus of control. So internal locus of control is I'm doing something because I know this is right, true, and good. Or I'm doing this because this is beneficial to me, or I see the benefit of this in general. External locus of control is I'm doing this because it makes so and so happy, because so and so told me so, because I'm going to get this benefit from somebody else. So when we're not making their academic achievements the bragging rights or like a party trick to show off to other people, that continues to work on that internal locus of control, which they really, really need if they're not going to, grow up into teenagers and adults who are just always just kind of like a leaf in the wind of just going wherever they're pushed, because they're pushed by other people, and that causes them to uh, to kind of conform to those things, right? We want to conform to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. We want to conform to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but that should also be an internal locus of control, in the sense that I have decided, or I know that I am a created being and this is expected of me, not, well, I'm supposed to do this. And so, I don't get in trouble from my parents or other people think I'm so pious, right? We talk about intention all the time. And intention really comes from being internal. And all of these exercises should also be from an internal yearning or an internal interest. And that takes time. It takes time, especially if this is new to us as an adult, new to our children, especially if they're a little bit older. Going on these outings can seem boring at first, but once they start to figure out like what's there, because at first they're looking around, well, it's trees, there's trees everywhere. I remember driving through Iowa when I was a kid. Well, my parents driving through Iowa when I was a kid. And I just remember looking like, there's just cows and corn. There's just cows and corn. Oh my gosh. Like, so boring. And if I would have had a little bit more knowledge of the different types of cows and I mean, really, there's one type of corn for the most part that is grown in the Midwest, but if I had a little bit more knowledge of the things that I was looking at, it would have been a whole lot more interesting. So, inshallah, the more that you do it, the easier it will be, and start out with 30 minutes, an hour, something along those lines, or if you're doing a hike, half a mile doesn't even, if you walk really slow, it takes half an hour. And that's like 2-year-old slow, like really, really slow. Um, so make the effort, inshallah. And then, so that brings us to the end of this section. This is where we talked about various activities to do when you are out of doors. Inshallah, next time we'll talk about, or we'll start a section about the knowledge that we as a family should have about nature and the benefit of having this knowledge and some of the resources that you can have for this, kind of what's expected of you, what's expected of the kids. That will be our next section, inshallah. So just a reminder, you will gain added benefit by reading the book yourself. You can find it at most of your favorite retailers, alhamdulillah. You can find a link to it on the description of this video or podcast as well. You can find me online as Middle Way Mom on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. On Instagram, I share our day-to-day homeschooling life as well. If you have any questions you'd like answered, you can email those to Shannon, that's SHANNEN, at middlewaymom.com. Thank you so much, and assalamu alaikum.